And welcome back. We have a 2007 HSE Range Rover, and this is a pretty fancy SUV, so we need fancy music. We're going to get the front struts changed out on this SUV. Now this one is equipped with air suspension, so it doesn't use the standard spring to hold up the weight of the vehicle. Here I'm using my scanner to deflate the system. It's the right thing to do, and it's the safe thing to do. You do not want any pressure inside of the airbags when you're removing them. Now if you're watching this video, chances are your airbag system is already shot and it doesn't hold any pressure, and you would know this because you would see that side of your car like sagging or sitting very low to the ground, indicating that your airbag system is no longer holding pressure. So at that point you won't even have to worry about deflating the system. As you've seen, I lifted up the truck from the subframe. It's a very strong and sturdy place to lift up the truck from. After it's lifted up, don't forget to use jack stands because you cannot rely on a floor jack. They're not safe at all. So if you want to keep your floor jack in place, that's fine, but always use jack stands. Now I lifted up the truck first, and now I'm removing the wheel, and that's because I have an impact gun. If you do not have an impact gun, make sure to loosen your lug nuts while the vehicle is still on the ground. Once the truck is secure on jack stands, always use wheel chocks on the back wheels. You definitely do not want the truck rolling on you. Now first thing we need to remove is this stabilizer link, but looking at the nut right there, it looks all mangled up, so I tried fitting a socket on it and it's just completely rounded off by the last person who installed it. So what I'm going to do is just follow it down here right up to the stabilizer bar, and I'm going to remove it from down here instead of from the actual strut on top. And to remove these, you're normally going to need a socket on the outside, and you're going to need a wrench on the inside, because if you don't do that, the ball joint itself is just going to keep spinning and you'll never get it out. Now in order to actually get this thing out, you're going to have to lift up the other side of the truck, and this is why it's important to have jack stands with you. And the reason why you want to do this is because there's a lot of tension on that stabilizer bar, and by lifting up the front end completely, it takes that tension off and it'll let you pop this ball joint out just like I'm doing here. And once that stabilizer link is disconnected, you can go ahead and lower the truck on the jack stands again. We have the brake hose and the wheel speed sensor that's gonna connect right here to the strut, so we need to remove them, and they're just held in with these rubber grommets, so they're pretty easy to just pop right off. And the next step is to remove the strut from the knuckle. It's held on with these two large fasteners right here. To get them off, we're going to use a wrench on one side and a socket on the other side, using a very long ratchet or a breaker bar because they're usually on there pretty tight. So we're going to go ahead and get them removed, and we could move on to the next step after this. Once we get both of these nuts removed, I'm going to go at the two bolts with my hammer and try to knock them out. Now you're not trying to do any damage to them, and be very careful to not hit the threads. You don't want to damage the threads on the fastener. But it is possible for these bolts to be stuck inside of there. When I was doing the other side, it was completely seized, and it took a lot of beating with a hammer and a torch, and at the end of the day we ended up having to go to the dealer to get a new fastener. Now you may have noticed that after I knocked out that last bolt, the screwdriver got jammed inside of where the bolt used to be, and that's a good thing. I like doing that because it actually holds the knuckle up and prevents it from falling. So now you can grab your floor jack, lift it up a little bit to take the tension off, and you can pull the screwdriver out now. At this point, it's just going to take a little bit of wiggling and maybe even some prying to separate them. But I'm going to leave the floor jack in place holding the knuckle up because I don't want any extra tension on this brake hose right here. Now you can open up your hood to get access to the strut tower, and this is where the air suspension is mounted to the body of the truck. There's going to be 3 fasteners that hold it in place, but in our situation we're missing one of the fasteners, so I guess someone has been here already. So we only have to remove 2 of them. Now when you're working on that last fastener, you want to make sure that you have your hand underneath it ready to catch the strut because it will just fall out. So here I am supporting the bottom of the struts, and I'm taking off, using my other arm, I'm taking off that last fastener up top, and now you're free to drop down the air suspension. Now I know I said drop down, but you really don't want to drop it down because it's actually still connected via a hose or an air line. So what I'm going to do is just let it rest right here on the knuckle, normally right where your tie rod would be. Now I see mine is disconnected, and that's because I was doing extra work on the truck. Normally your tie rod would still be in place right there, so do not worry about that. You do not have to remove your tie rod, but you would still want to rest your air suspension right there on the knuckle just to hold it up, and then you could remove the air line going into the strut. Remember, lefty loosey, and it's pretty easy to get off. It's not on there pretty tight since it's just a very small fastener. Once you get that line disconnected, now you can completely remove the air suspension. And now you can grab your replacement and just kind of put it in there the same exact way. We're going to rest it on the knuckle once again, and we're going to try to reattach that air line. Now the new strut or the refurbished strut should come with a new fitting. Initially I skipped this step and I just reused the old fitting that was on here, but later on I ended up having to come back in here and redo this. So it's just best to do it right now. Don't skip it. It can be a little frustrating because it's a very delicate part, and I know there's a lot of stress to not break it, but just take your time and you can swap them out. And then once you got everything put back together, you could go ahead and put your line back on and snug it down with your wrench. Now you don't want to go crazy with this because you got to keep in mind you're only threading into plastic. So what's going to do all of the sealing here is the rubber O-rings. You don't have to crank it down too tight. And now you can lift up the air suspension, and while you're supporting it from the bottom, I know it's pretty heavy, but you can reach around with your other arm and put in at least one of the nuts, and that'll hold up the suspension for now, and you could just move on to tightening it down now. And now I can lift up my knuckle since I already have my floor jack underneath it. Lift it up, and just it's gonna help you align your knuckle to the strut, and you're just gonna have to again wiggle it, play with it a little bit, and just get it to line up. Now at this point I just grabbed the bolt that was nearest me and I just jammed it in there, and I know I put it in through the wrong side. They're supposed to actually come in through the other side, but I just did it just for the sake of everything holding in place. And as you can see, the next bolt, the one that goes on top, I'm actually pushing it through the correct side. So once I get that one holding in place, then I can remove the lower one and put it back from the other side. Okay, so I noticed that these bolts have a lot of dirt and grime on them, so I just thought it'd be a good idea to clean them off. And this is when I discovered that these bolts are actually damaged. The threads on them look pretty flattened out, and realistically they should be replaced. So I took a quick look at the actual nut, and it's the same exact deal. The threads are damaged on it. So what I did here is I put plenty of blue thread locker in in hopes of keeping them in place. I told the customer about them, but I can only do so much convincing. It's not my truck. If it were my truck, I would have just replaced them. But yeah, I can only try to convince someone so much, and I didn't get the green light on that. So I have to put them back on. It sucks that the last person who removed these actually damaged them, but it is what it is. And they're actually supposed to be torqued down pretty tight, but as stripped as these things are, there's no way they're gonna hold that much torque. So I just went at it with my 1/2 inch ratchet, which is actually a very long one, and I just kept torquing down on it, going by feel until to the point where I felt like it was really tight, but I just wasn't going past that that threshold that was gonna make it start to strip even more. So I did the best I can with that. And now that all of that is done, you could go ahead and reconnect your stabilizer link. If you remember from the old one, we could not get the stabilizer link off of the strut because the fastener was stripped. So in our case, we had no choice but to replace the stabilizer link but you should just be able to go ahead and reconnect your original one at this point. Now, if you're having trouble getting your stabilizer link to reconnect to your strut or your stabilizer bar, you're gonna have to do what you did before to remove it, which is lift up the front end of the truck to take the tension off of the bar. So that's what I did here. I just had to lift up the front end just a little bit, and it gave me just enough slack to get this stabilizer link reconnected. Now at this point you should have everything reconnected and everything torqued down to spec. So now you could go ahead and put your wheel back on, and of course do not forget to tighten down your lug nuts to spec. And a good idea is to just take it out for a test drive. Once you're done with everything, come back and recheck the lug nuts. Okay, so I know these struts can get really expensive from the dealer, so people opt out for cheaper options, and there's actually a company out here that refurbishes these air suspensions, and that's what this one is right here. It's a refurbished strut, but there was a problem with it. They didn't do the job correctly and it was leaking. So of course the customer blames me for it, says I did a shit job, and you know, it's not the case because I did my part, I did my job, I did it as best as I could, and I'm not responsible for defective parts. Anyways, I just wanted to give a fair warning to anyone who's planning on buying any of these refurbished struts. You know, it's a hit or miss. So that's it. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you're considering subscribing, don't forget to hit that notification bell. And like always, thanks for watching.